Hi everyone, welcome to our continuing discussion related to the conflation of multiple identities in history. Now we started off looking at 2 Kings 17, and we noted that there was a colonization dynamic related to this replacement of groups of people. And so you had some groups of people being moved out of a space and then other groups of people being moved into a space. And we identified 5 groups of people that moved into the space that was previously identified as a space occupied by Jacob. We're going to look at some of these conflations. We're going to start off with looking at one group that has been conflated with Jacob, and hopefully it will shed some light on some of the historical dynamics that we've been exploring over time. Now, as a quick reminder, in 2 Kings 17, you may recall that the narrative is that the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, from Cutha, from Ava, from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and then placed those entities in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel who had been taken out of that space. And those entities possessed Samaria. Not only did they possess Samaria, but at one point, clergy was brought in order to instruct these groups of people on how to basically operate as Jacob, to perform as Jacob, to practice the spirituality of Jacob, the culture of Jacob. And so, in essence, these collectives took on the identity of Jacob, the entity that was removed. They sort of took on that identity. We're going to start off looking at one entity, and that is Hamath. But Hamath is also pronounced Kamath, and you also see Hama. It also has another name, so it went through these variations in terms of these names. It has another name which indicates epiphany. And so this place was identified as a prehistoric settlement and pretty much associated with Syria. You also have it associated with the Arameans and the Persians. And so you have this name in this place, this group of people associated with a number of other entities throughout time. Now, Britannica goes on to indicate that the Arabs took the city in the 7th century, and then it was captured by Crusaders in 1108. It was retaken by the Muslims in 1115, then destroyed by an earthquake in 1175. It transferred again in 1188. And since the World War I, it has been identified as simply Syria. And when you look at the history of Kamath or Hamath, you'll notice that there are a number of colonizer dynamics with respect to this group. In some instances, them being conquered, and in some instances, them being the conquerors. We're just going to look at the history of this particular name and to get a little bit more insight about this group of people that took on this identity of Jacob in that particular space. So Kamath or Kamathi, this group of people, they are identified as descendants of Canaan. However, because of that Kham that's there, if you recall earlier discussions, sometimes Kham, C-H-A-M, is an indicator of Shem. But this particular narrative indicates that these individuals were descendants of Canaan or Canaan. And here you can see where the Hamathi were also known as the Kamath with the Chamath. And also remember, when you see that ITE at the end, as we've discussed before, that sound is E, even though it looks like IT. Now, when we start to look at the etymology, we have this Strong's 2574, and this is in the Hebrew. This name, again, is indicated as Chamath with the Chamath. In this instance, it's identified as a place north of Damascus. And here you see additional name origin information and also information about the number of times this particular name appears in scripture. And so there's an indication that it appears 30 times with the spelling of Hamath. And here more detail is provided about the use of this word Hamath or Kamath in scripture. And you can see here that it's also identified as a fortress or a sacred enclosure. You also see indications of an additional transliteration in the form of Amatu, and it is Amattu or Amatu. You also see a variation of AMAA. It's also indicated that this particular group of people had their own king, they had gods of their own, and then they had a specific territory that was assigned to them. And then you also have it indicated that they contained the Israel exiles. It's also indicated that they furnished colonists for Samaria. And so this collective of people provided the colonizers for the people of Jacob who were moved out. And then, of course, this group moved in. And you see in this particular dictionary, and this is from 1808, that the name Hamath is also known as Amatu. And so you see it spelled a couple of ways there, Amattu or Amatu. Now, of course, one thing that really sticks out here is in terms of these transliterations for this word, this people group, Hamath, you have so much diversity. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind, because you have a group of people who have taken on another identity in terms of the Assyrian colonization. And then you have this particular group of people having these identities associated with these different names, these different transliterations. And so you also see here that this particular people group is associated with conquest with respect to Sargon. You also see an indication that in terms of territory, it was pretty much adjacent to what will be considered Israel's territory or Jacob's territory. And now we get to the most important part of this examination, and it is the meaning of this name Kamath or Hamath. And the meaning is associated with the word wall, with the construct, pun intended, of wall or being walled. Now, going further into this etymology, you see at 2346 this koma, and you see it specifically means a wall. And you can see this idea of Hamath as wall appearing in scripture over 100 times. You also note that this is rooted in that word calm, and we've talked about calm before, which is that CHAM. Now, this particular resource is the Hitchcock's Bible Names Dictionary. And when it examines Hamath, it adds a little more nuance in terms of that wall. And it indicates that Hamath is anger, heat, a wall, hence the red hot wall. As noted, we also have Hamath or Hama or Kamath, indicating epiphany. And so we're going to look at some epiphanies with respect to this name Kamath. And so we understand that the Hamath or the Kamath are conflated with Jacob because of this colonizer dynamic. And what you also see here when you analyze the name Hamath or Kamath is that it means wall. What's most important, however, is what wall means in various languages. And so what you see here when you look at the Portuguese, when you look at the Luxembourgish, you see that wall or HAMATH means muro or more. And you see this consistency across a number of languages. And so when you look in the Afrikaans, when you look in the French, you see M-U-U-R and you see M-U-R. And in the Afrikaans, it's even capitalized. And so it is indicating a proper noun. Now, this is important because there has been this significant conflation in terms of the identities with respect to Hamath and Jacob. And now you can see that this conflation is, in essence, a conflation between Jacob and more. But when you are looking at this particular rendition of more, it is attributed to Hamath or Kamath. And so it makes sense that there would be this conflation in terms of Jacob and Kamath given the colonizer resettling dynamic. But what has not been clear for many people is that this word more in this particular context is simply another way of saying Hamath or Kamath. And so that is where you are getting some of this conflation, even in current times, with respect to Jacob and the more. And here you see this continuation with this word more in the Dutch and also in the Norwegian. And then when you start to look into this particular transliteration of more, what you see is this theme about strengthening. And so you see in the Aromanian, moros, you see moros, meaning to strengthen. And so when you think about a wall, you think of a stronghold, you think of to strengthen, and that is what this is being associated with. You also have this idea of what has been presented as the vanguard. And so when you have a vanguard, that is the guard that goes in the front, that is the stronghold, that is the one that advances. And so it almost looks like a wall of people or a sea of people. And here you see a little bit more specificity when you're looking at the historian, and you see murum, you see muse, you see muse again, and you also see that mure associated with mouse or murine. And here you continue to see this theme about strengthening with respect to this name, moros or mure. And so essentially Hamath or Kamath is understood as a wall, as to strengthen. But in terms of the transliteration, this name is more. And so as we wrap this up, this provides significant food for thought for individuals who are identifying simultaneously as Jacob and as Kamath. Because as you remember, you can only have one father line, and some individuals appear to be confused about that when making these identifications. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that you had almost a confederation going on with respect to who the Assyrians placed in that particular location. And so you have a collective of people. So it's not just one entity, it's not just one group of people, but this particular entity, this particular collective of people, they have a very specific identity, a very specific name that is related to the historical migration of what has been known as Jacob. And so it's very important that people really dig into this and get a better understanding of these identities. And so if individuals are identifying themselves in a particular way, it's their responsibility to delve into what it means. And so how do they operationalize these identities? And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Jacob or you're talking about Kamath or more. It's important that when someone is asserting an identity, that they first and foremost have clarity about what it is that they are asserting, and that they are able to engage in what is known as apologetics with respect to whatever it is that they are asserting. And because there are so many religious or spiritual implications going on here, it's important that people take on the responsibility and become familiar with the historical, spiritual narratives upon which they are depending when they are asserting these identities. And so again, when you look at these identities with respect to Jacob, now you have to ask the question not only which Jacob, but when you ask, is it Hamath or Kamath, you also have to ask, is this Jacob the more Jacob? And so that needs to be disentangled, because clearly you have a colonizer situation, and individuals may be identifying as Jacob, but they may be a different Jacob than the one that you might be thinking of when you hear Jacob. But again, there is significant conflation going on here, not only with this particular group, but with the other four groups that have been identified, from the Babylonians to the Kuth to the Ava and the Sepharvim. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.